how well can you collect taxes for the Mongol overlord? That's the new principle of power. So the Mongols accept that there's something called Rus. They have no trouble with that. But who is the Grand Prince of Rus? The Grand Prince of Rus is the person who can collect the tribute. Having a list of titles is very easy, right? But what really matters is, are you paying the tribute or is someone paying the tribute to you? So the point about Galicia-Volhynia is that it's going to have a bright future. Galicia and Volhynia are very important to the future, to the history of Ukraine, but also they maintained some kind of Ruthenian statehood for basically a bonus century into the 1320s, 1330s, when they fall to Lithuania and to Poland. So about 1320, the Lithuanians have gotten to Kyiv. By and Volhynia becomes part of Lithuania. Okay, Volhynia becomes part of Lithuania. Galicia becomes part of Poland as of 1339. Okay, so now we have two successors of Rus. We have the Lithuanian Rus and we have the Galician Volhynian Rus. That's two. The third one, the one that we're going to focus on today, is Mongol Rus. So the part of Rus which falls durably under Mongol control from circa 1240 deep into the 15th century. So a different story, a story of multiple centuries, multiple generations. Time matters a lot. So this is just a basic historian's point. It matters a lot whether a regime governs a territory for 50 years, 100 years, or 300 years, right? That's just it's a very basic point. And so when we're starting to think about what's different between Galicia-Volhynia and the northeastern territories that become Mongol Rus, durability of Mongol rule. Galicia-Volhynia encountered the Mongols. They only very briefly paid tribute. The territories of Mongol Rus, hint, Mongol Rus is what's going to become Moscow and the Russian Empire and all the rest of it. Okay, so the territories that become Mongol Rus, that are Mongol Rus, are under Mongol control for centuries. That's a basic fundamental difference. So Mongol Rus, here's another way to think about it. It is one of the successors of Rus, for sure. And we're going to see the connections between Mongol Rus and Kievan Rus. But it is also one of the many Mongol or post-Mongol states all across Asia and Eastern Europe. So the Mongols, after they come and destroy, which admittedly is that's their famous moment, 1240, 1241, they arrive, they destroy, they conquer everyone, they have to go back for a funeral, as happens, changes all of history, right? The Batu Khan arrives, he destroys, no one can resist him, gets a phone call, didn't get a phone call. He gets notice that he has to go back to Mongolia basically for what? For a succession crisis. A funeral is the polite way of saying it, but a succession struggle. When someone dies, there's a succession struggle, right? So 1237 to 1241, that's the period that you all remember. The Batu Khan comes, he conquers, no one's resisted, he goes back. But after this, there is the Mongol state, which is remembered under the name of the Golden Horde, okay? But the Golden Horde, over time, itself falls apart into various entities. And these entities they're often very fuzzy in European history. They kind of just show up on the margins every now and again, making attacks or as allies in wars or whatever. But these are fairly durable entities. And we have to understand Moscow not just as a post-Rus entity, but also as one of these post-Mongol entities, along with the Nogai Horde, along with the Kazan Khanate, along with the Crimean Khanate. And by the way, for us, the Crimean Khanate is the most important because the Crimean Khanate is the one that controls Crimea and then much of the north coast of the Black Sea, what's now the south of Ukraine. So we have to imagine the Mongols establishing a state which over time fragments into a number of different entities, of which one is Moscow. Of which one is Moscow. Now, how is Moscow different? Moscow is different in religion. It's not pagan as the Mongols are, to use the term of abuse that the Christians use, and Moscow doesn't convert to Islam. This is important too. The rest of these entities convert to Islam. So, but Moscow doesn't. Moscow is Orthodox. Moscow is Orthodox, but it's Orthodox in an interesting way, right? It's Orthodox in a place. Mark this for the future. It's Orthodox in a place where there's no other way of being Christian. This is really important. I mean, I think right down to the present moment. There's no other way of being Christian. If you're Christian, you're Orthodox. That's it. Whereas west of this, in Kyiv and in the rest of Europe, there are going to be lots of other ways of being Christian. And even if you are Orthodox in what's now Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, you're going to be in a series of encounters with other sorts of Christians over the next few centuries. In Moscow, this is not true. Orthodoxy is Christianity, Christianity is orthodoxy. And this is all, and related to this, also to Mark, there isn't any theology. There isn't any disputation about religion in Moscow. There, in points further west, there is going to be. The Orthodox are going to take part in all of the interesting conversations around Reformation, Counter-Reformation, all of that. That's not going to be happening in Moscow until much later, when Moscow and Kyiv come into contact for the first time, which is not for centuries. It's not for centuries. It's not in this lecture. It's in the 17th century. Okay, so we're in Mongol Rus. Mongol Rus is the northeast. It's the district which I mentioned last time, Suzdal. And then the Suzdal, surrounding territories, the northeast of what had been Rus. And the way that the political system is set up by this, is set up in this northeastern Rus, this Mongol Rus, is really a kind of fresh start, in the sense that the Mongols have come and destroyed. Okay, good, that's true for everyone. Then there's the Black Death. It's a bit of a mess. There's really no one around to write. And in addition to that, a new principle of political succession is set up. The principle of political succession in the old Rus, the one based in Kyiv, was admittedly very messy and to the point of incomprehensibility, but it had something to do with the ruler and his sons. It's about as much as we can say. And that's, by the way, not so unusual in Europe. This whole idea that it was the eldest son and it was all very simple, that usually covers over a whole bunch of illegitimacy and bloodshed. But, you know, okay. So, illegitimacy and bloodshed gets a lot of nods. I just want to record that for the camera. All right, so focus. So in northeastern Rus, in and around Suzdal, there's a new succession principle, which is how well can you collect taxes for the Mongol overlord? That's the new principle of power. So the Mongols accept that there's something called Rus. They have no trouble with that. But who is the Grand Prince of Rus? The Grand Prince of Rus is the person who can collect the tribute. So that is a new principle of rule. That is new compared to Kyiv, obviously, where if you were in Kyiv, you were the one taking the tribute, right? And by the way, this is a really fundamental thing about political power. If you want to figure out who is actually in charge, who is paying tribute to whom? Because everyone says, I'm the king and the czar and all the galaxies and so on, right? That's very easy. Having stationary, okay, they didn't have stationary yet, but having a list of titles is very easy, right? But what really matters is, are you paying the tribute or is someone paying the tribute to you? So the rulers of Muscovy had titles, right? They were the grand princes of Moscow, which sounds great and certainly had its pluses, but they were paying tribute to the Mongols, and they were the grand princes of Moscow because they could pay tribute to the Mongols. The Mongols chose the man who could collect the tribute, and so that's a different principle of succession. The people who ran Mongol Rus were princes who were descended from the old Rus, not in any particular distinction, but they were of the blood, but they were only the grand princes of Rus because they were the ones who could collect the taxes. And then the other way that this is a fresh start is that the whole system is based in a new city, which is Moscow. So Moscow existed as some kind of fort or something in the 12th century, but Moscow had no princely line. Moscow is not a district in Old Rus. Nobody goes to Moscow to rule anything, right? It's not one of these districts like Suzdal or like Chernihiv where you go and you rule. It's not a district at all. It's no place. It's nowhere. Moscow becomes a town, becomes a meaningful place with a princely line after the Mongol destruction of Kyiv, and because it's a prince of Moscow who's able to collect the tribute. It was also, well, there's also some marriage involved. In 1317, Yuri, who was a prince of Moscow, married the sister of the Khan of the Golden Horde, right? As one does, you know, in situations like this, right? So he also marries into power, and at that point, power passed durably from a more important, bigger city called Tver to Moscow. And from that point, Moscow is going to be the center of this entity. And it's going to be the princes of Moscow who eventually remember, it takes them a while, but who eventually remember to say, we are the rulers of all of Rus. The first one, by the way, to, as far as we know, who says that he's the ruler of all Rus was Vasily I, who ruled from 1389 to 1399. And the evidence we have is there's a coin where he appears and he says, I am the ruler of all Rus. On the other side of that coin, it says, long live Sultan Toktamish, which reminds you what the actual political order is. He's the ruler of all of Rus. Terrific. But what he means by all of Rus is the bit of Rus that is under the control of the Golden Horde, right? That's under the control of the Mongols. Now, all of this, the Mongol connection is very important because when the Mongol connection is broken, the basic state form remains. There's no clear moment in the history of Muscovy where you can say, okay, the Mongols were here, they were doing everything, and then they got on their little horses and left. That's not how it worked at all. The way that it worked was that over the course, somewhere in the middle of the 15th century, the Moscow stops paying tribute, but they don't change at that point. They just stop paying tribute. It's the same entity. Okay, so we have a state which is in some way post-Rus. Religion, princely family, language, all of that. But it's also in many ways a new start under the Mongols. So it's post-Rus, I would say, and it's post-Mongol. And to give credit where credit is due, the Muscovites knew how to fight. And the reason they knew how to fight was that they fought with and then eventually against the Mongols. So the Mongol cavalry techniques, which the Mongols brought with them to Europe and which no one could withstand, were then learned by the Muscovites because, of course, the Muscovites were part of the same state. They were fighting on the same side. So they were very good at war, and the way that they set up their armies in 5 parts has everything to do with the way that Mongols set up their army. So that's very important to know. The Muscovites knew how to fight. That is part of their heritage. The heritage that they don't have is all the legal bureaucratic heritage of Kyiv, which we've talked about earlier. They're free and clear of that. For better or worse, they're free and clear of that. It's rather the Lithuanians who pick up that heritage.